You've got 5 minutes, my father-in-law, the boss, snapped before the $5 million pitch. He wanted to see me crumble. I had no notes, no deck, just my phone and a deep breath. 30 minutes later, the room fell silent. Then the client smiled and said something I'll never forget. 5 minutes, Sophia. Colton's voice sliced through the morning air as I reached for my coffee mug. My father-in-law stood in my office doorway, gray eyes glinting with something that made my spine straighten. The Morrison team just arrived. They're waiting in conference room 1. My hand froze midway to the mug. The Morrison presentation was tomorrow. My laptop was locked in IT. 8 weeks of preparation and he was giving me 5 minutes. That's impossible, I started. For minutes now, he said, checking his Rolex. Better hurry. If you've ever been underestimated at work or faced sabotage from those in power, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us share stories of women who refuse to be silenced. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Brown liquid splashed across my shoes, the expensive heels Gregory had bought me for our anniversary. Colton didn't even glance down at the mess. He just stood there blocking my doorway, savoring this moment he'd clearly orchestrated. My materials are at the printer, I said, my voice steadier than my hands. The presentation deck is on my laptop in IT. You know this. Then you'd better get creative. He stepped aside with mock courtesy. 3 minutes, Sophia. Don't keep Victoria Morrison waiting. Victoria Morrison. The CEO who'd flown in from Boston specifically for tomorrow's meeting. The woman who controlled a $5 million contract that could transform Whitmore Analytics' pharmaceutical division. She was sitting in conference room 1 right now, expecting a presentation I couldn't give. I grabbed my phone from the desk, the only thing I had. My fingers shook as I pulled up my notes app, trying to access the cloud backup. Access denied. Company security protocols. Of course. This is sabotage, I said, meeting Colton's eyes directly. This is business. His smile was razor-thin. Real executives adapt. Though I suppose that's hard to understand when you marry into success rather than earn it. 3 years. 3 years of these subtle cuts, these careful undermining comments. 3 years of pretending I didn't notice how he credited my wins to Gregory's influence while ensuring my failures were mine alone. But this wasn't subtle anymore. This was war. I pushed past him, my broken heel clicking unevenly on the marble floor. The executive hallway stretched before me like a gauntlet. Through the glass walls I could see my colleagues at their desks, some glancing up with curiosity, others with something that looked like pity. They knew. Everyone knew what was happening. 2 minutes, Colton called after me, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. The bathroom was closer than the conference room. I ducked inside, my hands gripping the sink as I stared at my reflection. My face was pale but composed. The dark circles Emma had noticed at lunch yesterday were hidden under concealer. My hair was perfect. I'd styled it this morning thinking about tomorrow's presentation, not knowing Colton had already moved the pieces on his chessboard. 8 weeks of work. 8 weeks of studying Morrison Pharmaceuticals' market patterns, their drug pipeline, their competition. I'd built a predictive analytics model that could revolutionize how they tracked physician prescribing patterns. It was all in my head, but how could I present it with nothing but my phone? 1 minute, Colton's voice echoed from the hallway. I straightened my jacket, wiped the coffee splatter from my shoes with a paper towel and walked out. The conference room loomed ahead, its glass walls revealing the scene inside. 8 executives arranged around the polished table. Victoria Morrison at the head, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, fingers drumming against her portfolio. Colton stood by the door like a sentinel. Your presentation, Mrs. Whitmore? He emphasized the last name, reminding everyone I was here by marriage, not merit. Right here, I said, holding up my phone. His eyebrows rose in manufactured surprise. That's rather unconventional. So is moving a meeting up 24 hours without notice. I opened the door before he could respond. The room fell silent as I entered. 8 pairs of eyes tracked my movement. Victoria Morrison's expression was glacial. Ms. Morrison, I began, then caught myself. Mrs. Morrison. Thank you for making time today. We were told the presentation was ready. Her voice could have frozen water. We've flown in specifically for this. It is ready. I set my phone on the table, screen up, fighting to keep my hands steady. But before I begin, I'd like to understand something. What's the one insight about your prescriber data that would fundamentally change your market approach? Silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. We've covered our requirements extensively, the CFO said, shifting in his Italian leather chair. In the preliminary meetings. Requirements and revelations are different things. I pulled up my phone's calculator app, the only tool I had. You're launching Oncoprex next quarter. Every analytics firm you've met has shown you beautiful dashboards, tracking prescription rates, regional adoption, physician demographics, standard metrics, safe predictions. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Just an inch, but I caught it. But that's not what keeps you awake at night, is it? I started sketching numbers on my phone screen, holding it up so they could see my rough calculations. The FDA approved Oncoprex for second-line treatment. But your real market, your $5 million question, is first-line prescription. You need to know which doctors will take that leap and why. The room's energy shifted. The CFO stopped fidgeting with his pen. Traditional analytics track what physicians prescribe. I continued, my confidence building as I fell into the rhythm of the data I'd lived with for 8 weeks. But you need to predict what they're thinking before they prescribe. The hesitation patterns. The patient profiles that trigger conservative versus aggressive treatment choices. I turned my phone sideways, using the Note app to sketch a rough diagram. There's a 3-second pause in electronic prescribing systems when doctors consider off-label use. 3 seconds that your current analytics can't capture, but that predicts market adoption 6 months out. How could you possibly know that? Victoria asked, but her tone had changed. Less ice, more interest. Because I spent 6 weeks analyzing prescription timing data from public health databases. Not the prescriptions themselves, the metadata around them. The hesitations. The revised entries. The cancelled and resubmitted orders. It's all there if you know how to look. I was in my element now, despite having nothing but my phone and my memory. This was my 8 weeks of work distilled to its essence. No fancy slides, no polished graphics. Just the raw insights that mattered. Your competitors are tracking what happened, I said, meeting Victoria's eyes directly. I can show you what's about to happen. Through the glass wall, I saw Colton's expression. The smug satisfaction had drained from his face. This wasn't going according to his plan. He'd expected me to crumble, to apologize, to fail spectacularly. Instead, I was doing something else entirely. Continue, Victoria said, and for the first time she smiled. For 25 minutes, I walked them through algorithms I'd developed, market patterns I'd discovered, physician behavior models that existed only in my memory. My phone battery dropped to 12%. Sweat gathered between my shoulder blades, but I kept my voice steady, professional, even as I felt Colton's presence burning through the glass wall behind me. The 3-second hesitation pattern, Victoria said, tapping her manicured nail against the table. Show me the math behind it. I turned my phone sideways, using my calculator app to work through the statistical correlation. My fingers flew across the tiny screen, each tap a small act of defiance against the man who'd orchestrated this ambush. Public health databases show prescription entries averaging 11 seconds for standard medications, I explained, holding up the screen. But for off-label use of oncology drugs, that average jumps to 14.3 seconds. That 3-second gap? It represents physician uncertainty. Track it across thousands of prescriptions, and you can predict which doctors will become early adopters. The CFO leaned forward. Our current analytics firm hasn't mentioned anything about timing patterns. Because they're looking at outcomes, not process. I switched to my notes app, sketching a rough timeline. They're telling you what happened last quarter. I'm showing you what will happen next quarter. Through the glass, I caught Beth watching from her desk, Colton's secretary who'd witnessed 3 years of his calculated cruelty. She gave me the slightest nod, invisible to everyone else, but I saw it. Even she knew what this was. A public execution that was somehow becoming something else. Mrs. Whitmore, Victoria said, and I noticed she dropped the uncertainty from her voice. You said you have a working prototype? My stomach tightened. The prototype dashboard was sitting in pieces on my desk, waiting for tomorrow's assembly. The prototype exists. It's just not physically here. Because the meeting was scheduled for tomorrow, she said. It wasn't a question. The room went silent. Victoria's eyes shifted from me to Colton, who'd somehow materialized in the doorway. He entered with that practiced smile, the one he used for damage control. "Technical difficulties are unfortunate," he said smoothly. "Perhaps we should reschedule when Sophia is better prepared." "I disagree." Victoria's voice cut through his attempted save. "I've sat through 47 vendor presentations in my career. 47 PowerPoints full of promises and projections. This is the first time someone has shown me the thinking behind the solution." She stood and the room seemed to hold its breath. My phone chose that moment to flash its 10% battery warning. "However," Victoria continued, walking around the table toward me, "I need to know this isn't just theoretical. Can you demonstrate even a basic proof of concept?" My mind raced. The prototype was in pieces. My laptop was locked away. But I had something else. The beta testing account I'd created on my personal tablet sitting in my desk drawer 20 feet away. "Give me 90 seconds, I said. Colton's voice was sharp. "Sophia, I don't think." 90 seconds, Victoria interrupted him, checking her Cartier watch. "Starting now." I walked out of the conference room with as much composure as I could manage, my broken heel clicking unevenly on the marble. Don't run, I told myself. Running would look desperate. But my pace was just short of a sprint. My office door was locked. Of course it was. My keycard was in my laptop bag in IT. "Looking for this?" Beth appeared beside me holding her master keycard. She swiped it without a word and I squeezed her hand in silent gratitude. 30 seconds gone. I yanked open my drawer, grabbed the tablet and powered it on. The loading screen felt eternal. Come on, come on. 50 seconds. Colton announced from the hallway loud enough for everyone to hear. He wanted the whole floor to witness this. The tablet finally loaded. I pulled up the beta dashboard, my fingers flying through the login screen. The interface was rough, unpolished, but it worked. It showed real data, real patterns, real predictions. "Time's up," Colton called. I walked back into the conference room with 5 seconds to spare, tablet in hand. "Your proof of concept," I said, connecting it to the room's display screen. The dashboard filled the wall, rough around the edges but functional. Real-time prescription data flowed across the screen, heat maps showing hesitation patterns, predictive models calculating adoption rates. "This is live data?" Victoria asked, standing to get a closer look. "From the last 30 days. Public databases only, of course. But watch this." I selected a specific region, zooming into prescription patterns for their competitor's drug. "See this cluster of prolonged decision times? These physicians are prime targets for Oncaprex education. They're hesitating on your competitor's drug, which means they're looking for alternatives." The room erupted in quiet discussion. Victoria's team huddled, pointing at different aspects of the dashboard, their excitement palpable. This wasn't what they'd expected from a corporate analytics presentation. "How long have you been developing this?" Victoria asked. 8 weeks of focused development. 2 years of conceptual work. Alone. I felt Colton's presence behind me, his breathing slightly elevated. "The concept and execution are mine. The Whitmore Analytics team would handle implementation and scaling." Victoria nodded slowly, then turned to face Colton directly. "Mr. Whitmore, you have an exceptional analyst here." "She's family," Colton said, the words sounding like they were choking him. "We nurture talent at Whitmore Analytics." "Interesting." Victoria's smile was sharp. Because this felt very much like a trial by fire. Moving a meeting up 24 hours, presenting without materials. Some might call that setting someone up to fail. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I'm sure there was a miscommunication," Colton said, but his voice had lost its smooth edge. "I'm sure." Victoria turned back to me. "Mrs. Whitmore, or do you prefer Ms.? Either is fine. I have one condition for moving forward with this contract." She pulled out her business card, the thick cardstock catching the light. "You lead this project. Not a team, not a committee. Personally." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I would be honored. No one else touches this without your approval. Not your husband, not anyone." Her eyes flicked to Colton. "Is that acceptable to Whitmore Analytics?" Colton's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Around us, his employees watched through the glass walls. This was his company, his domain, and Victoria Morrison had just crowned me in front of everyone. Of course, he managed. Whatever the client requires. Victoria handed me her card. Not to Colton. To me. My direct line is on the back. Call me tomorrow, when the meeting was actually supposed to happen, and we'll discuss terms. As her team filed out, Victoria lingered by my shoulder. Her voice was low, meant only for me. I've been in this business 20 years. I know sabotage when I see it. I also know talent when I see it. She glanced at Colton, who was trying to intercept her CFO. Don't let them dim your light. She swept out of the conference room, her team falling in line behind her. The silence they left was deafening. Colton stood by the window, his reflection staring back at him. His trap had snapped shut all right. But somehow I wasn't the one caught in it. The conference room door clicked shut behind Victoria Morrison, and for a moment nobody moved. Colton stood frozen by the window, his reflection in the glass showing something I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. Then, like a switch flipping, his face hardened back into its familiar mask of control. My office. Now. He didn't wait for a response, just strode out, expecting us to follow like obedient dogs. Gregory finally moved from where he'd been hovering by the door. He touched my elbow just barely, then pulled his hand back as if I might burn him. Come on, Sophie. Let's not make this worse. Worse. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Maybe both. The executive elevator ride was suffocating. Colton faced forward, jaw clenched. Gregory studied his phone like it contained the secrets of the universe. I watched the floor numbers climb, each ding marking another second closer to whatever explosion was coming. Colton's office occupied the entire northwest corner of the building, floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that cost more than most people's cars, and a sitting area designed to make visitors feel small. He positioned himself behind the desk immediately, reclaiming his throne. Sit, he commanded. I'll stand. Gregory made a small, pained sound. He took the chair furthest from his father, still refusing to look at me directly. You went completely off script, Colton said, his voice low and dangerous. That presentation wasn't what we approved. There was no we involved. I developed that presentation alone, for a meeting that was supposed to be tomorrow. Are you suggesting I deliberately sabotaged you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Before I could answer, Gregory spoke, but not to me. Dad, is she? Are you saying she's lying about the meeting time? The words hit harder than any slap. My own husband asking his father instead of me. Seeking Colton's version of the truth rather than mine. I'm not suggesting anything, I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. I'm stating facts. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow at 2. My laptop is in IT for updates that were mysteriously required this morning. The printed materials are at the copy center, scheduled for pickup tonight. Circumstances change in business, Colton said smoothly. Successful executives adapt. And unsuccessful ones create circumstances designed to make others fail. Gregory's head snapped up. Sophie, you can't just accuse. What? Tell the truth. I turned on him then. Where were you during that presentation, Gregory? Playing golf? Getting coffee? Anywhere but standing beside your wife while your father tried to destroy my career. I didn't know. You never know. That's the problem. You never want to know. Colton leaned back in his chair, watching us fight with something like satisfaction. Regardless of your paranoid theories, Sophia, the fact remains that you've overstepped. Victoria Morrison may have been impressed by your little improvisation, but you work for Whitmore Analytics. Every client relationship, every innovation, every idea you develop here belongs to the company. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, that's not entirely accurate. I pulled up the document I'd been saving for 3 years, the one Gregory had never bothered to read when I'd asked him to review it before signing. Section 7, subsection 3 of my employment agreement. Intellectual property developed outside of standard working hours using personal resources remains the property of the employee. Colton's expression didn't change, but I saw his fingers tighten on his desk. You're suggesting that dashboard was personal work? I'm not suggesting. I'm stating. The predictive hesitation algorithm, the temporal pattern recognition system. I developed those on my own time, filed provisional patents under my maiden name. Sophia Chin, not Whitmore. I showed him my phone screen, the patent office confirmation emails dated over the past 2 years. Every innovation I showed Morrison today is legally mine. The silence was deafening. Gregory stared at me like he'd never seen me before. You've been filing patents? He asked. Without telling me. I tried to tell you. Multiple times. But you were always too busy, too tired, or too focused on keeping your father happy to listen. Colton stood slowly, his movements controlled. You may own some algorithms, but you're still bound by your employment contract. And your marriage contract. The non-compete clause only applies if I'm terminated for cause or if I divorce Gregory and join a competitor. I know exactly what I signed. I met his stare directly. Just like I know about Chicago. About Morrison Pharmaceuticals. About how your division there collapsed after you lost their account. The color drained from Colton's face. Gregory looked between us, confused. What's she talking about, Dad? Nothing. Ancient history. But Colton's voice had lost its edge. Victoria Morrison remembers it differently. She remembers your rigid thinking and failure to adapt. Her words, not mine. The desk phone rang. Colton ignored it. It rang again. Then his cell phone started buzzing. Mr. Whitmore? Beth's voice came through the intercom. The board is calling an emergency meeting. They've heard about the Morrison presentation. Tell them I'll call back. Sir, they're already here. In the main conference room. Gregory stood. Dad, what's happening? But I knew. Victoria Morrison didn't just run a pharmaceutical company. She sat on 3 corporate boards. She played golf with our chairman. She just watched Colton try to sabotage his own employee. And she was the type of woman who didn't let that slide. We should go, Gregory said, reaching for my arm. I pulled away. You go. I have work to do. Sophie, please. We need to talk. We needed to talk 3 years ago. 2 years ago. 6 months ago. Every time your father humiliated me in meetings, stole credit for my work, or scheduled family dinners that made it clear I'd never be family. Where were you then? He had no answer. He never did. I left them there and walked back to my office. The floor was buzzing with whispers. News traveled fast in glass buildings. Beth caught my eye as I passed, gave me a small thumbs up behind her desk where Colton couldn't see. My office felt different now. Smaller maybe. Or maybe I was just seeing it clearly for the first time. A pretty cage in a tower built by men who'd never wanted me there. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, finally back from IT. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My presentation, my research, my 8 weeks of work that had almost been my professional funeral. My phone buzzed. Gregory, coming home late. Dad needs me. Of course he did. Gregory always went where he was needed, and it was never to me. I worked until the office emptied, until the only sounds were the hum of computers and the distant noise of cleaning crews. At 9:30 I finally closed my laptop and gathered my things. The drive home was quiet. The house was dark when I arrived. Gregory still at the office, still choosing sides in a war he refused to acknowledge existed. I poured a glass of wine and sat in my home office, staring at the wall of certificates and awards. Summa cum laude from Northwestern. Analytics Excellence Award. Innovation in Data Science. All those achievements, and I was still just the woman who'd married into the Whitmore family. My phone rang at exactly 10 p.m. Unknown number. Sophia? This is Victoria Morrison. My wine glass stopped halfway to my lips. Mrs. Morrison. I wasn't expecting. I'll be direct. I want to offer you a position. Senior Vice President of Predictive Analytics at Morrison Pharmaceuticals. 800,000 base, plus equity, plus a signing bonus that should adequately compensate you for any complications from leaving your current position. The room spun slightly. That's incredibly generous, but you're worried about the non-compete. I've had my legal team review it. Client companies aren't considered competitors. You'd be free to join us immediately. You'd be free to join us immediately. Victoria's words echoed in my ear as I set the phone down. $800,000. Equity. Freedom from Colton's suffocating control. All I had to do was say yes. But first I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting. The next morning, Gregory was gone before dawn. Another emergency meeting with his father. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done in 3 years, and drove to the downtown public library. Using Whitmore Analytics computers for research would be like sending Colton a detailed report of my plans. The library's archived business journals went back decades. I started with Chicago 2018, Whitmore Analytics Midwest Division. The articles were buried deep, but they were there. Major pharmaceutical contract lost due to strategic disputes. Whitmore Midwest restructures after client exodus. And then the smoking gun. An interview with Victoria Morrison in Pharma Executive Quarterly. We require partners who can evolve with the industry, she'd said. Unfortunately, some firms remain stuck in outdated methodologies, unable to adapt to changing market dynamics. The article didn't name Colton directly, but the timeline was clear. Morrison Pharmaceuticals terminated their contract in March. By September, Whitmore Midwest had collapsed. I photographed every page with my personal phone. No trail, no evidence I'd been looking. My phone buzzed. A text from Beth. Can we meet? Urgent. Not at office. I found her at a coffee shop 6 blocks from Whitmore Analytics, hunched in a corner booth. She looked older than her 52 years, dark circles under her eyes, hands wrapped around her cup like it was a lifeline. I can't do this anymore, she said before I even sat down. What he makes me do, it's wrong. Beth, what are you talking about? She pulled out a small notebook, hands shaking. Your emails. He has me forward everything to a private server. Every contact you make, every meeting you schedule. She stopped, tears forming. What? He has me track your personal calendar. Your doctor's appointments. He wanted to know if you were trying to have children. My stomach turned. Why would he care about that? I don't know. He just said to report everything. When you had your annual exam last month, he asked specifically about birth control prescriptions. Beth's voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Sophia. My daughter, she has lupus. The treatments aren't covered by insurance. I need this job, the health benefits, but what I'm doing to you. I reached across the table, took her trembling hands. You're not doing anything to me. He is. There's more. She flipped through her notebook. Phone logs. He records your calls from the office line. And last week he had me pull your personnel file. Not just performance reviews. Everything. Background check, credit report, even your parents' information. My parents? They live in Ohio. They have nothing to do with. I know. But he wanted leverage. That's what he called it. Leverage. I photographed her notebook pages while she kept watch. 3 years of surveillance, documented in Beth's careful handwriting. Why are you telling me this now? Because what happened yesterday, that presentation, that was evil. And you still won. You turned his trap into triumph. She wiped her eyes. My daughter just turned 18. She'll age into her father's insurance next month. I can finally leave. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women bound by different chains to the same terrible man. Beth, would you be willing to document all of this officially? If needed. She nodded slowly. After next month. After my daughter is safe. I left the coffee shop with more evidence than I'd expected and a fury that burned cold in my chest. But the day's revelations weren't over. When I returned home, a silver Mercedes sat in our driveway. Margaret Whitmore emerged, elegant in cream cashmere and pearls, looking exactly like the society matron she'd become after divorcing Colton 15 years ago. We need to talk, she said, not waiting for an invitation before walking into my house. She settled into my living room like she owned it, which technically she probably did. The house was in Gregory's name, purchased with family money. I heard about yesterday's performance, she said. Impressive. Also foolish. Excuse me. You embarrassed Colton publicly. You showed strength. That's not something Whitmore men tolerate in their women. She studied her manicured nails. I should know. I made the same mistake 30 years ago. What are you talking about? Margaret's laugh was bitter. You think you're the first woman to marry into this family with ambition? I had my MBA from Wharton. I was running the emerging markets division when I met Colton. Young, brilliant, full of ideas. Her voice softened. Just like you. But you divorced him. You got out. After 20 years. After 2 children. After signing agreements that would make your head spin. She pulled a document from her purse. This might look familiar. It was a buyout agreement, dated 2008. Margaret had signed away all rights to her business ventures, innovations and client relationships in exchange for a comfortable settlement and silence. "He'll offer you something similar soon," she said. "A generous package to disappear quietly. Take it." "Why would I?" "Because the alternative is worse." She leaned forward. "Whitmore men don't just defeat their enemies. They destroy them. Systematically. Completely. I watched Colton do it to 3 executives who challenged him. One ended up having a nervous breakdown. Another was blacklisted from the entire industry. And the third was me." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "I fought for 2 years. Cost me my career, my reputation, most of my friends. In the end, I took the money and reinvented myself as a charity fundraiser. It's a nice life, but it's not the life I'd planned. You're telling me to give up. I'm telling you to survive. There are battles worth fighting and wars worth losing. Learn the difference." She left me with the old agreement and a warning. "Check your prenup, dear. Really read it this time." That night, while Gregory attended another emergency meeting with his father, I spread our prenuptial agreement across my desk. I'd signed it 3 years ago, young and in love, trusting Gregory when he said it was just standard protection. Page by page, I read what I'd actually agreed to. Most of it was typical asset division, spousal support terms. But buried in Section 12, subsection F, was a clause that made my blood freeze. In the event of pregnancy or birth of children, all intellectual property developed during the marriage, regardless of previous provisions, becomes joint marital property subject to equal division upon dissolution. Equal division. Meaning if I had a child and then divorced Gregory, Colton could claim 50% of everything I'd created. My patents, my algorithms, my life's work. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through the past month's conversations. Colton's sudden interest in grandchildren. Gregory's increasing comments about starting a family. His mother's casual mentions of how nice it would be to have little ones around. It wasn't about legacy or love. It was about legal theft. My laptop dinged with an email. From Colton, sent to the entire executive team. "Please join me in congratulating Gregory and Sophia as they prepare for the next chapter of their lives. We look forward to growing our Whitmore family." My phone immediately exploded with texts. "Congratulations. When are you due? So exciting. I wasn't pregnant. Had never indicated I was. But Colton had just announced it to everyone who mattered, creating a narrative I'd have to publicly deny or privately accept." The front door opened. Gregory's footsteps, heavier than usual. "Sophie." His voice carried a strange tone. "We need to talk about starting our family." I stood there, holding the prenup with trembling hands as Gregory waited for my response about starting a family. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt like hours. "Your father just announced to the entire executive team that I'm pregnant," I said, my voice eerily calm. Gregory's face went pale. "He what?" "Check your email." He pulled out his phone and I watched his expression shift from confusion to horror. "Sophie, I didn't know he was going to." "Of course you didn't. You never know what he's going to do. That's your superpower, isn't it? Willful ignorance. That's not fair." "Fair." I held up the prenup. Was hiding this clause about children fair? If I have a baby, I lose rights to my intellectual property. Your father could claim half of everything I've created. I didn't know about that clause. You signed it too, Gregory. Your name is right there. He sank into the armchair, suddenly looking much older than his 34 years. "We need to correct this. Tell everyone it was a misunderstanding." "No." I set down the document. "First, I need to show you something." I pulled out my laptop and opened the files I'd been collecting. The Chicago articles. Beth's surveillance notes. His mother's old buyout agreement. For the next hour, I laid out the truth about his father. Not the successful businessman he pretended to be, but the systematic destroyer of careers and lives. Gregory's face grew paler with each revelation. When I showed him the evidence of offshore accounts Beth had found, accounts siphoning money from Whitmore Analytics, he finally spoke. "This can't be real." "It's all real. And there's more. Tomorrow I'm meeting with 3 people your father destroyed. Maybe after hearing their stories, you'll finally understand who you're defending." The next morning, I drove 40 minutes outside the city to a truck stop diner where no one from Whitmore Analytics would ever venture. They were already there when I arrived. 3 ghosts from Colton's past, gathered in a corner booth like survivors of the same war. Sarah Chin, no relation despite the shared surname, looked nothing like the brilliant analyst from her old company photos. Stress had aged her 10 years in 3. She developed the algorithm that became the foundation of Whitmore's predictive modeling system. He called it collaborative development, she said, stirring her coffee absently. Said we were a team. Then one day my keycard stopped working. Security escorted me out. The next week he announced his breakthrough innovation to the board. Marcus Thompson, former CFO, had kept meticulous records. I found discrepancies. $3 million routed through shell companies in Delaware. When I brought it to the board, Colton had already poisoned them against me. Said I was embezzling. The investigation cleared me, but the damage was done. No one would hire me. The third was Robert Jameson, Colton's former business partner from 20 years ago. We built the company together. 50-50 partnership. Then his lawyer found a technicality in our operating agreement. I lost everything overnight. My wife left me. My kids won't speak to me. All because I suggested we should modernize our approach. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already knew. Because you're the first person who might actually be able to stop him, Robert said. You have something we didn't: evidence, allies, and leverage. They spent the next 2 hours sharing documents they'd saved, connections they'd maintained, wounds that had never healed. Sarah had emails showing Colton's pattern of intellectual property theft. Marcus had financial records suggesting fraud. Robert had correspondence proving Colton had planned his betrayal for months. There's a board meeting next month, Robert said. Quarterly review. Colton's planning to restructure, eliminate several positions. Yours is probably on the list. How do you know? Because I still have friends there. Good people too scared to speak up. But if someone gave them a reason, a real chance at change. I left the diner with a flash drive full of evidence and a plan forming in my mind. But I needed more than historical grievances. I needed current proof and powerful allies. Victoria Morrison agreed to meet me for lunch at her private club downtown. She listened to everything, her expression never changing, fingers steepled under her chin. I suspected as much, she said when I finished. Colton's reputation precedes him, though few dare speak openly about it. Will you help? I already am. The contract we're signing specifically requires your involvement. If you leave Whitmore Analytics, the deal becomes void. That's $5 million in leverage. She signaled the waiter for more wine. But you need more than that. You need the board on your side. They're all his friends. No, they're businessmen. Show them Colton is bad for business and they'll turn on him faster than you can blink. She pulled out her phone. I sit on 3 boards with members of Whitmore's board. Let me make some calls. The quarterly meeting would be the perfect stage for your revelations. That evening I found Beth still at her desk long after everyone else had left. I need one more favor, I said. She looked up, fear flashing across her face. Sophia, I can't. Just listen. I'm not asking you to steal anything or risk your job. I just need you to do what Colton already asks. Document everything. But make copies. Real copies. Over the next 3 weeks, Beth became my silent partner in building an unassailable case. Every email Colton sent pressuring board members. Every document he altered before meetings. Every communication showing his manipulation and control. The hardest conversation came on a Thursday night, 3 days before the board meeting. I'd prepared dinner. Gregory's favorite, salmon with asparagus, the meal I'd cooked on our first anniversary when things were still good between us. We need to talk, I said as he sat down. About Dad's announcement? I've already told people it was a misunderstanding. About your father's crimes. And what you're going to do about them. I laid out everything. The evidence. The testimonies. The financial fraud. The lives destroyed. Gregory sat there, his salmon growing cold, his face cycling through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally a kind of hollow acceptance. You want me to betray my father. I want you to choose between being complicit in his crimes or being the man I thought I married. Sophie, it's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I stood, pushing my untouched plate aside. The board meeting is in 3 days. Either you stand with me and tell the truth or you stand with him and become just another enabler. There's no middle ground anymore. Gregory sat at that table for 2 hours after I went to bed. At midnight I heard his car start. Through the window I watched him drive away, heading toward his father's house. I didn't know what he would choose. But I knew that regardless of his decision I was done being silent. Gregory didn't come home that night. Or the next. His absence filled our bedroom with a silence that felt like held breath. The morning of the board meeting I dressed in my sharpest suit, black with a burgundy silk blouse, the color of controlled fire. My hands were steady as I applied my lipstick. This was war and I was done pretending otherwise. I arrived at Whitmore Analytics at 6:30, 2 hours before the meeting. The building was nearly empty, just security guards and the overnight cleaning crew finishing their rounds. Perfect. The boardroom was on the top floor, a glass fortress where Colton held court. I'd never been inside during an actual board meeting. Spouses weren't invited to those sacred gatherings. But today I wasn't coming as a spouse. Each board member's place was already set with their nameplate, water glass, and meeting agenda. I pulled out 9 USB drives from my bag, each one containing the same explosive content. Colton's offshore accounts, the testimonials from 15 former employees he'd destroyed, the Morrison contract with its non-negotiable clause requiring my involvement, and Beth's meticulous documentation of his corporate abuse. I placed each drive precisely beside each notepad, then picked up Colton's agenda. He'd buried my performance review and recommended termination as item 7, probably hoping the board would be tired and compliant by then. Too bad they'd have plenty to discuss before we got that far. You're here early. I spun around. Gregory stood in the doorway looking haggard. He hadn't shaved and his suit was the same one he'd worn 3 days ago. Where have you been? Thinking. Reviewing files. Making choices. He entered the room slowly like he was walking through quicksand. I know what you're planning. Are you here to stop me? I'm here to help you. The words hung between us. I searched his face for deception, for the weakness I'd grown accustomed to, but found something else. Resolve maybe. Or just exhaustion with living a lie. I've been at the office, he continued, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Going through financial records I should have examined years ago. Dad's been stealing from the company. From our shareholders. From everyone. He handed me the folder. Inside were bank statements, wire transfers, a clear trail of embezzlement spanning 5 years. All bearing Colton's signature. All hidden in accounts Gregory was supposed to oversee as CFO. You knew. I suspected. But suspecting and proving are different things. And proving requires courage I didn't have until now. He met my eyes. I'm sorry it took me so long. By 8:30, board members began arriving. Through the glass walls, I watched them find the USB drives, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern as they plugged them into their laptops. Richard Hamilton, the chairman, looked particularly grim as he scrolled through the evidence. Colton arrived at 8:45, striding in with his usual confidence. He didn't notice the USB drives. His assistant usually set up his technology. He was too busy reviewing his notes for my professional execution. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Hamilton began once everyone was seated. Before we address the official agenda, we need to discuss some concerning materials that have come to our attention. Colton's head snapped up. What materials? These. Richard held up the USB drive. Sophia, I believe you distributed these? I did. Colton's face darkened. My daughter-in-law has no standing in this meeting. She should be removed immediately. Actually, Gregory said, his voice carrying across the room, she's here as a key employee whose termination you've proposed. She has every right to defend herself. The father and son locked eyes across the table. The resemblance between them had never been more striking or more tragic. Additionally, Gregory continued, standing now, as CFO, I need to present some urgent financial discrepancies I've discovered. This is highly irregular, Colton started. So is embezzlement, Gregory said quietly. The room erupted. Board members shouted questions, demanded explanations. Colton's carefully controlled meeting devolved into chaos. Richard Hamilton pounded his gavel for order. Mr. Whitmore, Colton, these are serious allegations. The evidence on these drives suggests systematic fraud. Those documents are taken out of context, Colton said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. This is clearly a coordinated attack by a disgruntled employee and my own son, who's being manipulated by his wife. Manipulated. I stood, my voice cutting through the noise. Like Sarah Chin was manipulated when you stole her algorithm? Like Marcus Thompson when you framed him for embezzlement? Or Robert Jameson when you destroyed your partnership? Each name landed like a physical blow. Colton's face went from red to white. The conference phone in the center of the table suddenly lit up. Richard answered it. Mr. Hamilton? This is Victoria Morrison. I understand you're discussing Sophia Whitmore's position with the company. Victoria's voice filled the room through the speakers. She timed this perfectly. Mrs. Morrison, we're in a board meeting. I'll be brief. Morrison Pharmaceuticals' $5 million contract explicitly requires Mrs. Whitmore's leadership. If she's terminated, our contract becomes void immediately. I should also mention I've been in communication with several of your other major clients. As if on cue, Richard's assistant rushed in with a tablet. Sir, urgent messages from Henderson Industries, the Zhao Group, Brennan Enterprises and 3 others. They're all saying the same thing. Richard read from the tablet, his face growing paler with each word. If Sophia Whitmore is removed from their accounts, they'll terminate their contracts immediately. This is extortion. Colton slammed his hand on the table. No, a familiar voice said from the doorway. This is justice. Margaret Whitmore entered, flanked by 2 lawyers. She looked magnificent, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing the kind of quiet power that comes from old money and older secrets. Hello, Colton. Board members. She nodded graciously. I believe there's some confusion about company ownership. Margaret, you have no standing here. Actually, I do. She handed Richard a thick document. During our divorce, I retained 40% of founding shares in Whitmore Analytics. Colton assured me they were symbolic non-voting shares. My lawyers have recently discovered otherwise. Richard's eyes widened as he read. These are voting shares. Full voting rights. Which means, Margaret continued, I'm the largest individual shareholder in this company. She looked directly at Colton. You've held this company hostage for 20 years. Hidden profits, destroyed careers, built your empire on the backs of people you've crushed. It ends today. You can't do this, Colton said, but his voice was hollow. I built this company. We built this company, Margaret corrected. Before you decided I was too ambitious for a Whitmore wife. Before you made me choose between my career and my children. Before you broke me into pieces and bought my silence. She turned to me then, and for the first time since I'd known her, she smiled, really smiled. But some chains need breaking, don't they, Sophia? The board voted within the hour. It wasn't close. The vote was unanimous. 12 hands raised against the man who'd built this empire, who'd ruled it with an iron fist for 2 decades. Richard Hamilton's voice was steady as he read the resolution. Effective immediately, Colton Whitmore is removed from his position as Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Analytics. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Colton stood there, his usual commanding presence crumbling like a sand castle against the tide. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked his age, 63 years carved into deep lines around his eyes, silver hair no longer distinguished but just gray. Furthermore, Richard continued, the board appoints Sophia Whitmore as interim Chief Analytics Officer, with full authority over the Morrison project and our other pharmaceutical accounts. Security had been called, standard procedure, Richard assured everyone, though we all knew it was more than that. 2 guards stood by the door waiting. Colton gathered his leather portfolio with mechanical precision, his movements slow and deliberate. As he passed my chair, he stopped. Our eyes met. His gray gaze no longer cold but something else entirely. Confusion? Respect? Or just the bewildered recognition of seeing himself reflected in someone he'd tried to destroy? Well played, he said quietly so only I could hear. Then louder, addressing the room with a ghost of his old authority. I built this company from nothing. Remember that when it all falls apart. The guards escorted him out, their footsteps fading down the hallway. Through the glass walls, I watched employees stand from their desks, witnessing the impossible, Colton Whitmore being removed from his own kingdom. Margaret broke the silence. That went better than expected. He didn't even invoke the founder's clause. Would it have mattered? Richard asked. No. But it would have been Messier. He turned to me. The office is yours now. Everything in it. The meeting continued for another hour. Transition protocols, client notifications, legal procedures, but I barely heard any of it. I'd won. After 3 years of subtle abuse, public humiliation and systematic undermining, I'd won. So why did I feel so empty? Gregory found me in the bathroom afterward, splashing cold water on my face. You did it, he said to my reflection in the mirror. We did it. Your testimony about the financial records. Stop. He held up his hand. Don't give me credit I don't deserve. I should have done that 2 years ago. 1 year ago. Any time before today. I turned to face him. Really looked at him for the first time in months. The golden boy was tarnished. Dark circles, trembling hands, the weight of his choices etched into premature lines around his mouth. I need to show you something, he said, pulling out his phone. He opened a note-taking app, scrolled through pages and pages of entries. I've been seeing Dr. Patterson for 6 months. Therapy. Dad didn't know. Each entry was dated, documenting his internal struggle. October 15th. S presented brilliant analysis at meeting. Dad credited it to team effort. Should have spoken up. Didn't. Coward. November 2nd. Dad changed S's presentation without telling her. Watched her scramble. Said nothing. Self-hatred growing. December 8th. S cried in the car after Dad's holiday party. Wanted to comfort her. Couldn't find words. What kind of husband am I? Gregory. There's more. So much more. Every time I failed you I wrote it down. Like somehow documenting my cowardice would make it better. His voice cracked. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for to become someone worth forgiving. The bathroom door opened. Beth poked her head in. Sophia? They need you in. Oh, I'm sorry. It's okay, Beth. I'll be right there. She nodded and left. Gregory stepped back, creating space between us. We'll talk tonight, I said. At home. Home, he repeated like he was testing whether the words still applied. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings, phone calls, and transitions. By 5 o'clock I stood alone in what had been Colton's office. The space felt too large, too cold with its modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His presence still lingered, cologne, leather, and something harder to define. Power maybe. Or just fear. I was studying the view when I heard footsteps in the parking garage through the open window. 7 floors down, but the acoustics carried. I looked out and saw him, Colton, standing by my car. I took the elevator down, my heels clicking against the concrete as I approached him. He looked smaller here, without his office fortress, without his army of employees. Waiting to slash my tires? I asked. He almost smiled. Too crude. Not my style. Then what? He leaned against my car, suddenly looking exhausted. You remind me of someone. Who? Myself. 35 years ago. He stared at the concrete wall like it held memories. My father-in-law owned a consulting firm. Brought me in after I married Patricia. His daughter, Margaret's older sister. Did you know that? I shook my head. He made my life miserable. Every idea dismissed, every success credited to family connections. Sound familiar? He laughed bitterly. I fought back. Took over his company. Destroyed him completely. Patricia never forgave me. Divorced me a year later. I married Margaret on the rebound, thought I could do better the second time. Instead you became him. Worse. I became what I thought he was. Turned out he was just a scared old man trying to hold on to what he'd built. He straightened, adjusted his tie out of habit. You won today, Sophia. But winning and living with winning. Those are different things. Rain started falling, light at first, then heavier. Colton had no umbrella, no coat. Things that were always handled by assistants who no longer worked for him. I could have been better, he said quietly. To you. To Margaret. To Gregory. But being better requires admitting you were wrong, and I've spent so long being right that I forgot how. He walked away into the rain, his expensive suit darkening with water, his shoulders bent against more than just weather. I stood there watching until his figure disappeared around the corner. When I got home, Gregory was in the living room with Chinese takeout, from the place we'd ordered from on our first date back when everything seemed possible. I thought you might be too tired to cook, he said. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, eating in silence for a while. Then he pulled out a leather journal. This is everything, he said, placing it between us. Every time I failed you. Every time I chose comfort over courage. Every time I let him hurt you because I was too scared to stop him. Why document it? Because Dr. Patterson said I needed to see the pattern. To understand that each small betrayal was a choice. He set down his chopsticks. I chose wrong, Sophie. Every single time. And now I'm choosing differently. I stood up in that boardroom. I provided evidence against my own father. It's not enough, I know that. But it's a start. We can't just reset Gregory. Too much has happened. I know. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking if maybe we could try something different. Not husband and wife, not right away. Maybe just two people figuring out if there's anything left worth saving. That night he slept in the guest room, his choice, not mine. I heard him on the phone with Dr. Patterson, scheduling extra sessions. Through the door I heard him crying, deep, ugly sobs of a man finally facing himself. The next morning I signed the Morrison contract in what had been Colton's office. $5 million over 3 years with performance bonuses that could double it. Congratulations, Victoria said, shaking my hand. You've earned this. But as I looked at Colton's nameplate still sitting on the desk, Margaret's warning echoed. Whitmore men break women slowly. I feel like I've become him, I admitted to Victoria. I destroyed him the same way he tried to destroy me. Victoria studied me carefully. Did you lie? Steal? Fabricate evidence? No. Then you didn't become him. You survived him. There's a difference. She moved to the window, looking out at the city. Surviving isn't becoming, Sophia. It's transcending. Remember that. Victoria's words stayed with me as she left that day. Surviving isn't becoming. It's transcending. 6 months had passed since that boardroom confrontation, and I was finally beginning to understand what she meant. The morning sun streamed through the office windows. My office now, though I'd replaced Colton's cold modern furniture with warmer pieces that actually invited people to sit and talk. The earnings report on my desk showed a 30% revenue increase. The Morrison contract had attracted other pharmaceutical giants. Whitmore Analytics was thriving, but more importantly, it was healing. Your 9 o'clock is here, Beth announced from the doorway, no longer the anxious woman who'd once spied for Colton. As chief of staff, she'd blossomed into someone I barely recognized. Confident, decisive, protective of the culture we were building together. Send them in. Sarah Chin entered, the analyst whose algorithm Colton had stolen 3 years ago. She'd been my first rehire, brought back with a formal apology and the title of Senior Innovation Director she'd always deserved. The predictive model is exceeding projections, she said, setting down her tablet. Morrison's competitors are inquiring about licensing. What do you think? She smiled. Something she rarely did before. I think we're just getting started. After she left, I stood by the window watching the city below. Somewhere down there, Colton worked in a small consulting firm, his empire reduced to a single office and 2 employees. I'd heard he was doing pro bono work for startups, perhaps trying to balance some cosmic scale. Gregory said his father seemed smaller but somehow more at peace. They met for coffee once a month now, slowly rebuilding something that might eventually resemble a relationship. Gregory and I had our own reconstruction project. We'd separated 4 months ago. Not a divorce, but a recognition that we needed to learn who we were individually before we could know who we might be together. He'd moved into a downtown apartment, started intensive therapy 3 times a week, and began working with a different division of the company where he could build his own reputation. Twice a week we had dinner. Not as husband and wife, but as 2 people carefully exploring whether there was something worth salvaging in the wreckage of our marriage. Last Tuesday he'd actually made me laugh. Really laugh, for the first time in 2 years. My phone buzzed. Emma, final fitting in an hour. Don't be late. My sister's wedding was this weekend. A simple outdoor ceremony, nothing like the Whitmore social production mine had been. I arrived at the bridal shop to find her spinning in front of mirrors, radiant in ivory silk. You look perfect, I said, meaning it. You look happy, she countered. Really happy. Not that fake smile you wore for 3 years. I'm getting there. She adjusted her veil, studying me in the mirror. Is Gregory coming to the wedding? He's invited. Whether he comes is up to him. And you're okay with that? I'm learning to be okay with uncertainty. The wedding day arrived with perfect September weather. I stood beside Emma as her maid of honor, holding her bouquet while she exchanged vows with David, a teacher like her who looked at my sister like she hung the moon. During the reception, my father pulled me aside for our father-daughter dance. I owe you an apology, he said as we swayed to the music. For what? For pushing you toward Gregory. For saying he was good enough for you. I was blinded by the Whitmore name, the success, the image. He spun me gently. You were always good enough on your own, Sophie. I should have seen that. We all got blinded by the shine, I said. The important thing is we can see clearly now. Halfway through the reception, Gregory arrived. Alone. He'd had a major client meeting in Boston but had flown back specifically for this. His rental car was still running in the parking lot when he walked in, slightly out of breath, carrying a gift I knew he'd picked out himself because the wrapping was terrible. You made it, Emma said, genuinely surprised. I promised I would. He looked at me. I'm trying to keep promises these days. When the band played a slow song, he approached tentatively. Would you like to dance? I hesitated, then took his offered hand. We moved awkwardly at first, both trying to remember how we used to fit together. Then he said, remember our first dance? At that terrible club in Wicker Park. You stepped on my feet 3 times. But you kept dancing with me anyway. I thought you had potential. Do you still? I looked up at him, really looked. He'd lost weight, but in a healthy way. The therapy was working. I could see it in how he held himself, no longer constantly checking over his shoulder for his father's approval. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm willing to find out. Monday morning, I called an all-staff meeting. The conference room was packed, energy buzzing through the space. I announced Beth's daughter had been accepted into a clinical trial for an experimental lupus treatment, fully funded by the company's new employee assistance program. The applause was thunderous. Marcus Thompson was there too, hired back as CFO after his reputation was restored. Robert Jameson consulted for us now, his expertise invaluable. Even some of Colton's enablers had transformed, freed from the culture of fear he'd cultivated. We're not just rebuilding, I told them. We're reimagining what a company can be. That evening, I stood in my office as the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. 2 contracts lay on my desk, both life-changing, both terrifying in different ways. The first was from Victoria Morrison. A permanent position as Executive Vice President at Morrison Pharmaceuticals. Double my current salary, mentorship from one of the industry's pioneers. A chance to build something entirely my own. The second was an acquisition offer. With Margaret's backing and several investors, I could buy majority control of Whitmore Analytics, truly transform it from the ground up. Make it mine in every way that mattered. My phone chimed. Gregory, I'm at the grocery store. Thought I'd cook dinner tonight. Your place or mine? Or should we try something neutral? There's that new place on Michigan Avenue. Or we could just talk. About the future. Whatever that means for us. His uncertainty made me smile. The old Gregory would have made the decision for both of us. This version was learning to ask, to wait, to let me choose too. I looked at the contracts again, then at the city spreading endlessly beyond my window. 6 months ago, I'd thought revenge would be the ending. The final chapter where justice was served and the villain fell. But standing here now, I realized it had never been about endings. It was about beginnings. About choosing who to become when the chains finally break. About learning that transcending isn't about forgetting the past but about refusing to let it define your future. I picked up my phone to text Gregory back, then stopped. Some decisions deserved more than words on a screen. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, leaving both contracts unsigned on the desk. Tomorrow I would choose. Tonight I just wanted to have dinner with someone I was still getting to know, and talk about futures that were finally ours to write. If this story of corporate revenge and redemption kept you hooked until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Victoria Morrison turned Colton's own trap into Sophia's launching pad. That conference room reversal was pure brilliance. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories of underdogs fighting back. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.